All right, welcome back to the channel. It's your boy Fanon, and in this video, we're going to talk about Shawn Porter and a prediction that he co-signed on his podcast about Errol Spence Jr., Terence Crawford, and Yordenis Ugas. Let's talk about that in this video. All right, welcome back to the channel. It's your boy Fanon, and we're going to talk about the welterweight division. Before I do that, though, I want to say welcome you guys to the channel and also ask you to support my betting partner, BUSR, and you can go check them out at busur.ag, busur.ag/Fanon. Use the promotional code Fanon, and there will be special benefits that you'll have for using that using that when you bet on fights or whatever sports that you may do that with. But let's get into the video. Also, make sure you hit that like button. Shawn Porter was on the Shawn Porter podcast, and this is the first time that I actually heard Shawn Porter give a prediction for or co-sign a prediction for Errol Spence Jr. and Terence Crawford. And he also talked about the fight that was going to take place between Errol Spence Jr. and Yordenis Ugas, and I thought it was interesting, so I want to share that with you, and then give my thoughts about it. Before I get into the detail, though, man, look, Shawn Porter. When I hear this type of stuff, I take it with a grain of salt with Shawn Porter, because I know that Shawn Porter really does not like Errol Spence Jr. that much. Or let me put it this way: Shawn Porter never really shows that he doesn't really like somebody that much, because he's just such a nice guy, an affable guy. He and his father are really nice guys, affable guys. But whenever I hear him talk about Errol Spence Jr., there is that soreness that is still there with him, where he lost to Errol Spence Jr., and Errol Spence Jr. was most definitely didn't like Shawn Porter and to lead into that fight. So I just really think that there's something there with him. But in the podcast, I don't recall the names of the guys that are in the podcast, but, you know, very, very intelligent guys, very good at carry a very lively and good conversation in the sport about boxing. So, you know, if you're not already subscribed to the Porterweight podcast, make sure that you do. But, you know, they covered a series of issues, and one of them was the Terence Crawford fight with the fact that he was coming and fighting Yordenis Ugas, and what do they think about the Yordenis Ugas fight, right? So Shawn Porter and then their opinion was pretty much that, you know, they thought, or Shawn Porter said that he thought that Yordenis Ugas, you know, that Errol should be able to beat Yordenis Ugas. He mentioned that Yordenis Ugas was a, you know, I think he said Yordenis Ugas threw harder punches than Errol Spence Jr. And by that, I mean he was trying harder than Errol Spence Jr. to land big shots, but that Errol Spence Jr.'s power was a lot more natural, and it came with both hands, and that he believed that, you know, based on what he had seen, that Errol Spence Jr. should win that fight. But, you know, he doesn't know what Errol Spence Jr. will show up to the fight. Obviously, because of the car accidents that have taken place and the torn retina that he had in the last fight. So, you know, he was a little less committal about Errol Spence Jr. winning the fight than he would have been, say, if Errol Spence Jr. had not, you know, had that car accident. But the thing that got me was when one of them had said, the two guys, there was a very large brother, and then there was another guy, a European guy, who were debating with each other. And one said, look, man, the European guy said, hey, man, I really do believe that, or the guy of European descent, more European descent, said that he thought Errol Spence Jr. was the best fighter at welterweight, and that, you know, he would beat Terence Crawford. And the other guy, who was more of an African descent, says, yeah, I'm trying to do this and not, you know, be loaded or whatever, said that he believed that Terence Crawford was going to win the fight. And that he said that he actually thought that Terence Crawford would get a mid to late round stoppage. And Shawn Porter, very silently under the mic, so make sure you go check it out. And their videos, for everybody that want to say cap, cap, cap all the time, go to the video. And right when he says this, you can hear Shawn Porter saying, he said, yeah, I think Terence Crawford beats Shawn Porter. I mean, I think that Terence Crawford beats Errol. And then he said, yeah, I think it's a late round stoppage. Shawn Porter said, yeah, man, I can see that too. So basically what he does is he co-signs the prediction from the guy that says Terence Crawford will win, and he may win by stoppage. Now, my take on the matter is that Shawn Porter is one of my favorite dudes in the division. I like the guy personally. I like the guy very much. I root for him in most of his fights. Even when he fought Errol Spence Jr., I thought Errol Spence Jr. was going to win. But I watched that fight with one of the more neutral mindsets that I've had with a fight with a guy that I like a lot, like Errol. Like, I watched it with a very neutral mindset, man. Like, wow, this is a really good fight. And actually got to enjoy it and watch the punches were landing and all that. And I didn't ever really find myself at any point in time really rooting for another guy in that particular fight, right? So, but the entire time I got this sense that the lead-in post that Shawn Porter really just doesn't like Errol Spence. And then, of course, on the other side of it that Errol don't like him, and that Shawn Porter and Terence Crawford are friends. So the fact that he made point and say that, I think maybe a little bit more of just a little bit of him wanting Terence Crawford to win that fight and not necessarily wanting Errol Spence Jr. to win the fight. And maybe, you can accuse me of trying to read into Shawn Porter's mind a little bit, but it just seems that way, man, because Shawn Porter to this day never admits, he still says that he beat Errol Spence Jr., believes that he won that fight, and talks about that fight as if he didn't lose that fight, when he really doesn't do anything like that when he talks about with Terence Crawford, because obviously, he could be complaining out public about how the fight was stopped by his father and saying, hey, man, but he doesn't do anything, man. He retired, treated, Terence Crawford like he won, treated with respect. And so I just don't know, man, about Shawn Porter. But I will say, as far as the fight itself, man, that I do believe that this fight is going to happen. This fight is just way too big not to happen. And the things are lining up for the fight to happen. The fight with Yordenis Ugas, I do believe, is in line with this fight, with the fight between Errol and Terence taking place. Errol said that he was going to become undisputed champion. That's his goal. He has said his strap season. He's collecting all of the belts, and then he's leaving the weight class. So that is right along with what he's always said. And Terence Crawford still has that WBO belt. The Yordenis Ugas fight, and I'm glad that these guys really didn't get into this on that Porter podcast. They didn't act, and Shawn Porter, salute to him. He didn't actually act like there was something wrong with Errol Spence Jr. fighting Yordenis Ugas, because obviously, man, that fight is getting 3 belts. It's a fight that he's able to get done. And a fight, honestly, that I think he deserves. It's not a tune-up fight. It's definitely a championship-level fight because Yordenis Ugas is a champion. But it gives him a chance to be active heading into the Terence Crawford fight. And I'm glad that the fight is happening. And it sounded like the people on the Porter podcast, the Porter Way podcast, were also, happy that the fight was going to take place, right? So, I may think that Porter may have a little hateration going on for Errol Spence Jr., but at the same time, it's understandable. That's his friend, and Terence Crawford's his friend. Errol Spence Jr. is somebody that beat him that didn't think he lost to. And it's a very, very close fight that a reasonable person could say that Terence Crawford could win, and a reasonable person could say that Errol Spence Jr. could win. The part that gets me is I can see the mid-range stoppage. That I think maybe because he stopped you, that you think he could stop Errol. But, anyway, it is what it is. I appreciate Shawn Porter giving his input. That's my take on the matter. You let me know what you think in the comment section. And with that, I'm out. Peace.